In this lesson, we'll cover the very basics of video editing so that you have a good grasp of how to make basic adjustments to any clip before moving on to learning about more complex editing functions. If you are already familiar with the basics of editing, feel free to skip ahead to the intermediate editing lesson. We will be skipping all of the music functions for now as we have a dedicated lesson for that later on. We will be using CapCut to demonstrate the basics of editing, and if you cannot access CapCut, I recommend you watch the last lesson on the other editing apps that we recommend. All of these functions are very similar, just placed in different locations. And also there will be some overlap of what we're talking about in this lesson with the last lesson because we are covering the basics, and in the last lesson we went over some of the basic functions in each app. So if you haven't already, you can reference that lesson. But we wanted to cover the basics in a full dedicated lesson here so that you can understand exactly how to start a project, do all of the basic necessary edits to your clips, and then export it as well. So this is the interface in CapCut where you can see all of your projects, and from here you can rename them, duplicate them, and upload them to the CapCut cloud. You also have these quick buttons to access various other functions, and you can also search for various things on CapCut or templates, etc. So we are going to start a new project. Inside starting a new project, you can choose whether you want to edit a photo or make a collage. You can choose between importing videos, photos, and live photos. And of course, you can choose which folders that you want to import these videos from. For instance, I love to grab from my favorites folder all of the clips that I have, and we'll be using this Mount Fuji clip as a sample. So as you can see, when you tap on the video, you can trim the video before importing the footage. Let's say you only want the footage to start from when you step in, and also then from when you step out. Then you can trim it before you actually import the clip. You can select multiple clips by tapping on the top right hand little circle. Once you have selected your desired clip, you can add it to your project timeline. Now we have already walked through the basic interface inside CapCut, so I will save you the explanation there. You can watch the last lesson, but I do want to point out some of the basic things that you can change here. First of all, you can change the aspect ratio of your video by going in here and choosing your desired aspect ratio. Let's say you have a vertical video and you want to change it into a YouTube video, then you can do so here, and then you can adjust the framing as you want. And as you are scrolling on your timeline using your fingers, you can zoom in if you need to get really granular and be able to see a lot of the details. This is very helpful for later on when we talk about keyframing. Let's say you want to be very precise and you want to add a keyframe very close to each other, then this is when zooming in to the timeline is really helpful. Zooming out of the timeline makes it really easy to see everything at a glance, so you want to get used to using your two fingers to zoom in and zoom out. Of course, you can duplicate your clip really easily by tapping the duplicate button. You could also delete the clip here using the delete button. Now, CapCut default adds a little end to it where it says CapCut, tap to edit the text. You want to just delete this when you are inside CapCut. It's just their advertising mechanism. Now, when we are dealing with so many clips, you may want to trim them, you want to split the clips, or you want to make them faster or shorter, etc. So that is very simple. All you have to do is drag the two ends of the clip, and you'll be able to customize the length of it. You can also scroll to the spot where you want to split the clip and just tap on split, and then you can remove whatever you want. Let's say you want to delete the first part, then you can delete it that way as well. It can be easier than just scrolling through on the edges of the clip if it is a very long clip, or if you need to split in multiple places and delete multiple aspects or parts of the clip. One thing I have to point out is the menu that you can see at the bottom here inside CapCut is the main menu. So this is the menu that will show up when you don't have a clip selected. So if you tap anywhere else in the timeline, you will deselect the clip and you'll be able to see and access the main menu. So when you are on your main menu, these changes affect the entire clip. So for example, if you wanted to add a text here, you would add it in the main menu. When you have the clip selected, you won't be able to add a text because all of these effects down here affect this video clip. So when you're adding more layers, you want to make sure to deselect the clips so that you can access these menu buttons, so that you can add an overlay, add text, add effects, etc. And if you choose to adjust the color here, one thing to note is that when you, let's say you adjust the brightness, what will happen is there will be an adjustment layer. So this is a layer of edits that will happen to all of the clips in your timeline. Let's say you have multiple clips here. So we're just going to duplicate this to demonstrate the idea that you have multiple clips. You can adjust this adjustment layer so that it affects all of the clips on the timeline. Let's say you only want it to affect the first clip and not the second clip. Then you want to drag the adjustment layer back. It will snap in the timeline to where the clips end and begin. And then you can see that the adjustment layer only affects this part where it shows up in the timeline. So this is very different to, okay, let's delete it. This is very different to deselecting everything and then now selecting the clip and adding an adjustment. Let's do the same brightness adjustment to the clip itself. So what this is when you have the clip selected and you make the adjustment only happens to the clip. Whereas if you make the adjustment on your timeline, then you will have an adjustment layer that you can then customize and change throughout and move it throughout the timeline. So a few more things that you can make in the main menu here is change the background. So for example, the background would only show up if you actually have a video that allows for a background to show up. If you fill the full frame with your video, then you won't actually need to change the background function in any way. However, if your video does not cover the full frame, you can see that now there is a black background. You can change this color to be any color you want it to be to sort of create a frame. You can customize the color and eyedrop it too as well. So for example, I want this blue color to be my frame. So that's how you change the background. But in addition to colors, you can also make images as your background. They provide some images here for you to use. For example, you have this textured image. You can also add your own images from your camera roll. Note that these are only photo images that you can add from your camera roll and not videos. And if you want to combine videos, we'll talk about that later in video layering inside lesson 5. You could also add blur to the background. And what this means is that it will blur the main clip. It will expand the main clip to fill the entire frame, and then it will blur it out. And so the actions are still in the background. So when you look at this, you can see that there's action in the background, but it's just blurry. So this is a way to not add additional color or anything like that to the background, but to use your existing clip to create a blurry background. Now, if you want to change this clip by size, you can always use your 2 fingers to move it around like this. You can move it up, move it down. It will snap to the edges. It will also snap to the middle like this. So these snap functions are really helpful if you want to make sure it's centered, etc. But you could also use your hands to tilt it. You can rotate it. You can rotate it by 90 degrees or more. But what's really nice about CapCut is that you can do these little tilts in here. However, because it tends to snap to the original straight angle, if you want to be precise about your rotation, you want to go into the menu down here with your clip selected and go to Basic. And inside Basic, this is basically just another way to move your clip around by moving it on the X-axis or moving it on the Y-axis, so that's up and down. You can also change the scale of it in here instead of doing it manually by hand. You can also rotate it. And so this is the part that I like to use inside Basic. This allows you really precise rotation by just 1 degree. So if you want to rotate it by 1 degree, you can do so here. And you won't have to worry about it snapping back to its original straight angle. Next, if you want to speed up or slow down a clip, you can easily do so inside the speed button. You can see that there is a normal and there is a curve. Normal just means that the speed is changed consistently throughout. So this is changed to 2x speed consistently throughout. Now the keep pitch thing just means that if you're speeding it up, normally it will also speed up the voice and it will make it more high pitched. So you'll have this, if it's a dialogue, you'll have this little chipmunk voice. But if you want to keep the pitch the same and not have the pitch become higher because it got sped up, then you want to select keep pitch. Now we don't have any dialogue in this, so we don't need to worry about that. One more thing is, if you filmed in 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second and you want to slow it down a lot, but then it becomes glitchy, like so, let's say you want to slow it down to 40% of its original speed, you can now see that you have an option to smooth the slow motion. Because you don't have enough frames in a second right now to ensure that it stays smooth, you can manually do this in post. Though, of course, this is not a recommended thing to do, but you can do so and will try its best to smooth out the clips, even though you don't have enough frames in the clip. If you want to undo or redo any motion, all you have to do is tap this undo button or redo button on the right side here, just above the timeline. We will talk more about the curves and speed ramping in the next lesson because it is a slightly more advanced concept. And also, if you want to flip or rotate your clip, you can do so inside Transform. You can mirror your clip, like flip it horizontally. You can rotate your clip like so. And also, you can crop your clip to your desired ratio and crop it in. Another thing you can do is, let's say you want to pause the frame right here, then you can freeze frame. So this is towards the end of the menu and you can select freeze and it will freeze this particular frame as if you were just paused in time. And then you can go in and adjust it. Let's say you want to explain this particular frame for 10 seconds, then you can then adjust this and do a little voiceover here to explain this particular scene. Now let's talk about adjusting the color of these clips. So obviously you have filters where you can add all kinds of different filters, colors, but I generally like to use adjust. And in here I can adjust the brightness of the clip. I can adjust the contrast of the clip. So it can be very high contrast or very low contrast. Also, you can increase the saturation, decrease the saturation depending on your style. And you can apply to all of the clips too at the bottom here in the apply all button. Brilliance is basically a function where it will reduce the highlights and increase the shadows and make it a lot more brighter and slightly more vibrant in color as well. So that is brilliance. This is almost like a really easy one-click drag type of function where you can brighten up your clip. You could also sharpen your clip if you want, if it is a little blurry or if you just want it to be a little more defined. Now, HSL is a function that I personally love to use. This gives you the ability to customize certain colors within the frame. Let's say I want to change the blue, all of the blue color in this frame, then, or in this clip really, then I can go and select on blue. I can decrease the saturation, as you can see here. I can also change the hue of the blue and I can increase the lightness of the blue. Now this is actually a function that I use a lot when I'm editing the colors of my videos. Although I try not to edit too much of the colors and I try to have it just be the way it is filmed so it's true to real life. However, the iPhone clip can sometimes be very, very oversaturated depending on the lighting outside. And especially with the blue skies, you'll notice that when the sun is really high, the blue skies are really saturated. So what I like to do is come in here and desaturate the blues because I don't want to affect the saturations of any other colors. So I desaturate the blue. I also like to change the hue of the blue to be a little bit more of a teal color. And also I like to increase the lightness so that it's a little bit brighter. So that's how I mainly use the HSL function in here. Next is graphs. This is more slightly advanced like color editing, and it allows you to adjust the shape of the graph to increase the contrast or decrease the contrast or make the blacks a lot more lighter, etc. If you understand color editing, then you can definitely use this function, but this is not a function that I use, and especially for iPhone clips, it's really not so necessary. Highlights is just adjusting your highlights. Shadows, adjusting your shadows. Temperature is how warm or how cool your video is. And hue is how pink or how green your video is. And fade just means to fade the video, like gives it like a faded look. Especially it chooses the darkest parts or the blackest parts, and it fades the color a lot. I don't really use that as that's not really my visual style. Now, vignette is just adding a color to the outer edge. So if you want the audience's eye to focus on the subject, you can add a vignette to the outside so that the center is brighter and the outside is darkened. And lastly, you can also add grain. Now, this is also a personal stylistic preference. I personally never add grain, but grain gives it a little bit more of a vintage, slightly older look, and this can be some people's style that they prefer. Of course, you can add text to your video here. So you can add text and type whatever you want. Day in Kawaguchiko. Like so. And then you can move it around. You can adjust it. You can rotate it. You can also duplicate it. Like this. And then delete it. Inside the timeline, you can treat the text just like any other video clip and drag it across the timeline, customize it so that it is shorter and appears only in certain parts. Of course, you can also duplicate it and move it around if you like. Let's say you found a font and a size you like. Then you can simply duplicate it to type a different text in your next text box. Now, if you double tap on the text, you can also see that there's different styles that you can create for the text. You can increase the size here. You can decrease the opacity of the text, change the color of the text, of course. You can also customize the color of the text or eyedrop the color that you want of the text. Let's say I want to use this pink color on my boots here. Then I would eyedrop it. And there are different styles of text that you can use that are presets. For example, white text with black outline, yellow text with black outline, and so on. Now, those things can actually be customized down here as well. If you want to add a black stroke or a red stroke to your text, or you want to have no stroke, you can also add the glow, customize the glow if you like. You can also choose a different glow color, like a red glow, for example. You can add a background to your text. Let's say you want a red background so that the text will really pop from the video, because let's say if your video is really busy, then you can do this and add a background. And then you can also add a shadow to your text like so. You can choose the opacity, so the less opaque it is, the more it's like a shadow. The higher the opacity, the more it looks like a dark shadow. You can also increase the blur, decrease the blur, and also change the distance of the shadow, as you can see it moving here. You can also even choose the angle of the shadow. So this is dependent on where the light is shining on the text, and it will change the angle of the shadow. Next is effect. You can add specific effects to your text as well, and you can play around with a lot of the different options they have here. Honestly, personally, I don't recommend doing anything too complex with your text, because ultimately the video itself should do more of the talking and you don't need any overcomplicated text and animations. Speaking of which, the next thing is animations. Most of these are totally unnecessary and too much, but there is one that I want to point out that I think can be very useful, and that is the typewriter animation. So the typewriter animation just mimics a typewriter, and I think this is quite stylistic. If you have a really cute style of a font, let's say, and you have a little typewriter animation, then it can look really nice. Lastly, this is just a text bubble, all kinds of frames for your text and styles if that's what you're into. Lastly, I do want to mention that you can also generate automatic captions. So the app will automatically generate your captions based on what you are saying in the video. So now you can see you have the text generated here. And if you tap in, then you can select Batch Edit, and you can edit any of the text that they have generated in case they have made a mistake, or let's say you want to add a hyphen to this, or let's say you want to make sure this is capitalized in the first letter, then you can do that editing right here. And then you can change the style of the captions. And you want to note that this will apply to all of the captions, especially because this is checked.
If you don't check it, then it won't apply to all, but if you check it, then it will apply to all of the captions. So now you can choose the style, again, the effects, and so on and so forth. Now, lastly, I just want to also touch upon the export settings. So we are obviously exporting videos. We're not trying to make GIFs here, but in case you wanted to create a GIF, you can also select GIF on the top tab here. But because we are exporting videos, I want to show you how I export. I always export, if it is the final video, I export at 1080p because that is the recommended size to upload to social media, as we mentioned in lesson 1. If you prefer to upload higher quality, you of course can do 4K, but if you're trying to upload to social media, then I don't recommend that. For the frame rate, social media is 30 frames per second. That is the recommended frame rate. If you are more into film, then of course you can choose to do 24 frames, and you can also do 60 frames if you prefer. But these are things that should have been determined when you are actually filming the clip based on what type of video you're making, what type of look you want your final video to have, and so on. Now, the code rate is at what quality they will render the video. The default is unrecommended, but if you choose high, then it will take a long time to export your video. And I always just keep it on recommended, and all of the clips that I export and use have been perfectly fine for social media, so you can keep it on recommended. And Smart HDR is just a default function that has been toggled on, so I keep that on. And that is it for my export settings inside CapCut. And that concludes our lesson on the basics of editing. In the next lesson, we'll dive much deeper into overlays, overlaying videos, how to delete the background, how to keyframe, and lots more.